Imagine that you are walking down the streets of your city, feeling the warm sun on your face and hearing the sound of cars in the distance. Each step is a reminder of your history, of the struggles you have faced, and of the respect you have built throughout your life. Now imagine that, in an instant, all of this respect is ripped away from you. Your dignity is put to the test in a way you would never have expected. How would you react? This is the story of Juan Matos, a man who dedicated his life to his country, fought battles that few could even imagine, and yet, on an ordinary day, found himself humiliated in the heart of his city. What happened to him is not just a physical attack. It is a reflection of something much bigger. The sun was shining brightly that afternoon in São Paulo, reflecting off the windows of tall buildings and creating waves of heat that rose from the asphalt. João, now with slower and firmer steps, walked down the busy avenue with the help of his cane. Each mark left by the cane on the ground was an echo of past stories, missions accomplished, lives protected, and the pride of having served his country with honor. He didn't know that, in a matter of minutes, his life would change completely. Suddenly, hurried and determined footsteps approached. A young police officer, with a hard look and impeccable uniform, stopped at his side. The rude tone of his words was like an invisible slap. "So, old man, what are you doing here?" João looked up, and with the calm that the years had taught him, politely replied, "I'm just going home, young man. I had lunch with some friends." But the police officer, Corporal Torres, wasn't there to listen. His look was one of distrust, almost contempt, as he analyzed João from head to toe. "Going home, are you?" Torres said with a sarcastic smile. "You guys always have an excuse. But what about that face? Like someone who doesn't belong here. Why don't you go back where you came from?" Those words echoed in João's mind like thunder. He felt the blood rush to his face, but he kept his posture firm. After all, dignity and self-control were things he had learned throughout a lifetime of discipline. "Young man, I believe there is no reason for this kind of approach. I am a citizen like any other. I have the right to walk the streets of my city." But instead of backing away, Torres took a step forward, invading João's space. His tone of voice became even harsher. "Don't give me that, old man. I know the kind of people who hang around here. They think they own the place. Why don't you cooperate and stop making things difficult?" The silence on the avenue was broken only by the murmurs of a few people passing by, slowing down to observe. No one, however, dared to intervene. João knew he was facing a delicate situation, but he had no idea how far it could go. And it was at that moment that he realized this was not just a misunderstanding. It was a test, not only of his patience, but of his dignity. Would he accept it in silence? João took a deep breath, trying to control the mixture of indignation and disbelief that was growing inside him. He knew that exploding wouldn't solve anything. Years of discipline had taught him the value of calm in moments of tension. With the same serenity as before, he replied, "Young man, I've served my country, and I know what order and respect are. I didn't come into this world to be treated like this. If there's a problem, you can come with me to the police station, and we can clear up any issues there." But Torres didn't want any clarification. His expression hardened, and what he did next completely changed the course of that afternoon. With a sudden movement, he pushed João backwards. The old man lost his balance and fell to the ground with a loud thud. The cane slipped from his hand and hit the sidewalk with a sound that seemed to echo throughout the avenue. The small crowd watching froze. Some people raised their cell phones to record, but no one intervened. The tense silence was broken only by João's heavy breathing, who, still on the ground, felt the pain of the impact. He leaned on his arm, which was now throbbing, and looked up at Torres. There was something in the former general's eyes that made the police officer hesitate for a brief moment. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something much deeper. It was dignity. Torres, however, tried to disguise his discomfort with an even more authoritative tone. That's what happens when you resist authority. Next time, respect the police and don't act like a bully. João didn't respond right away. He felt the blood pulsing in his face, but he refused to show weakness. He knew that, at that moment, every word and every gesture he made would be crucial. He stood up slowly, with the help of a young man who approached, and composed himself. The pain in his arm was strong, but not as strong as the certainty that was growing inside him. This wouldn't end there. "Young man," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Torres let out a sigh, sarcastic laughter, throwing his hands up in the air. "Oh, really? And who do you think you are, sir? Just another random guy who thinks he's important?" The crowd around him began to grow, and the eyes on Torres became more inquisitive. Some people murmured among themselves, and the officer's discomfort was visible. Even so, he maintained a disdainful tone, trying to justify his actions to the curious. "I'm just doing my job, guys." This gentleman here was acting suspiciously. Just a routine approach. João felt his anger rise, but he transformed it into something greater: determination. He knew that this humiliation wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who, at some point, had been treated with disrespect. He looked directly at Torres, with a look that seemed to pierce him. "Young man, learn one thing. Respect is not something you grant. It's my right." That sentence hung in the air, reverberating among the crowd. Torres tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that he was beginning to lose control of the situation. João knew that this was just the beginning. Something inside him told him that he would have to fight once again for what he had always believed in: respect and dignity. This part intensifies the conflict and deepens the audience's emotional connection with João. It also plants the seeds for the development of the larger struggle he will face, keeping the suspense about how he will react and how the story will unfold. João walked away slowly, holding the cane that had been returned by a young man who watched the scene with a mixture of indignation and concern. His arm throbbed, and each step seemed to carry the weight of the humiliation he had just suffered. He knew he was hurt, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the wound to his dignity. The crowd around him began to murmur louder. People approached, some filming the police officer, others offering help. An elderly man, a former general who had dedicated his life to the country, was treated like a delinquent in broad daylight. The scene was revolting, but also deeply symbolic. "Sir, are you okay?" asked a woman who had watched everything. His eyes reflected compassion, but also the uncertainty of someone who didn't know how to act in the face of such a clear injustice. João, with a slight nod, replied, "I'm fine, my dear. At least, in what really matters." But something in the tone of his voice revealed otherwise. He knew he couldn't let that go, and the scene unfolding around him seemed to confirm it. People began to argue among themselves, some defending João, others simply commenting on the absurdity of the situation. Torres, visibly uncomfortable, tried to justify himself out loud, as if seeking to validate his actions. "I'm just doing my job. It's nothing serious, just an approach. You don't know what this man might be hiding." The police officer's words sounded empty, and the audience around him could tell. A woman with a cell phone in her hands stepped forward and pointed the camera directly at him. Work? That's not work. It's abuse of authority, she said, her voice filled with indignation. Do you know who he is? This man deserves more respect than you can imagine. João felt the tension rising. He didn't want the situation to escalate into something bigger, but at the same time he knew that what was happening there had symbolic weight. What he would do next would be crucial. Taking a deep breath, he raised his cane, leaned on it, and looked around. Every face that stared at him carried an expectation, a silent question. What are you going to do? I don't want to riot, João said, with a calmness that contrasted with the situation. I just want it to be clear that no one has the right to take away another person's dignity. Today it's me, tomorrow it could be any of you. The crowd was silent for a moment, and then words of support began to emerge. That's right, said a young man. We can't accept this. This is absurd, added another. Torres took a few steps back, realizing that the situation had gotten out of hand. He muttered something inaudible, turned and left, trying to maintain his pose of authority, but clearly shaken. João looked at the people around him, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that this fight would not end there. With the help of some strangers, he continued on his way, now no longer just a former general walking home, but a man in search of justice. Deep down, he felt that this humiliation would be the beginning of something bigger. And as the images of his scarred face and his cane touching the floor began to circulate on social media, João prepared to face a new battle, a battle that he would fight until the end. João felt his arm throb as he lay in the hospital bed. The room was silent, lit only by the soft light that filtered through the curtains. His body he was hurt, but his spirit remained intact, like that of a soldier who had survived a tough battle. He stared at the ceiling, remembering every detail of what had happened on that avenue. It wasn't just a physical attack. It was an attack on his dignity, and he knew he had to do something about it. The door suddenly opened, interrupting his thoughts. Rafael, his grandson, hurried in. His expression was a mixture of indignation and sadness when he saw his grandfather there, with his arm bandaged and a visible cut above his eyebrow. "Grandpa," said Rafael, quickly approaching and holding his grandfather's hand. "My God, what did they do to you?" João looked at his grandson with a slight smile, trying to ease the situation, but the seriousness in his eyes soon took over his expression. "Rafael, I didn't expect to see you so soon," he murmured, trying to hide the pain. Rafael, however, couldn't contain his anger when he saw his grandfather's condition. "Grandpa, this is unacceptable. A police officer, someone who should be protecting us, doing this to you?" Rafael clenched his fists, his voice thick with anger. "We need to report this case immediately." João sighed, looking away. He knew his grandson was right, but something inside him made him hesitate. It was as if his entire life, marked by discipline and sacrifice, had led him to accept that now he was just another old man walking the streets. "Rafael, the world no longer sees me the way it used to. For most people, I'm just another face in the crowd." His grandfather's words hit Rafael like a blow. He saw something in João's eyes that he had never seen before, a shadow of resignation. But for Rafael, that man in the hospital bed was not just his grandfather, he was a hero. "Grandpa, you're not just any old man," Rafael said, his voice breaking. "You served this country, you built a history, you fought for Brazil. You can't accept being treated like this. It's not fair." João looked at his grandson, feeling a mixture of pride and melancholy. Rafael's words had awakened a flame in him that for a moment seemed to have gone out. He took a deep breath, gathering strength to face the physical and emotional pain. "Raphael, you're right," Joan said finally. "It's not for me. It's for all the people who go through this and have no voice. I can't let it end like this." Raphael held his grandfather's hand firmly, his eyes shining with determination. "Let's get justice, Grandpa. You deserve it. Brazil needs to hear your story." And it was there, in that small hospital room, that João realized that this would be his next battle. It wouldn't be easy. He would face prejudice, challenges, and perhaps even more humiliation. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. With Raphael by his side, he was ready to transform the injustice he had suffered into a symbol of resistance. While his grandson began to plan the next steps, gathering evidence, talking to witnesses, and making the story known, João looked out the hospital window. The sun was shining again, but this time he felt something different. It wasn't the heat of the day, but a new strength that was being born within him. In the room lit by the cold lights of Raphael's office, João sat in a comfortable chair, but his face still bore the marks of the incident. Raphael was in front of him, completely focused, with his cell phone and a notepad in his hands. His grandson's determination was palpable, and João watched with pride as he put together the pieces of a puzzle that could change the course of this story. "Grandpa, I already have the videos that were recorded on the avenue. Some are going viral on social media. I also got the medical report confirming your injuries," Raphael said, leafing through the pages of notes. "Now, we need to locate the witnesses who were there. Some have already left comments on the posts. That could be decisive." João nodded slowly, while Raphael continued with renewed energy. "Let's do this right. Document everything. Witnesses, reports, images. This case will not be ignored. We will not let what happened to you be just another forgotten story." Despite the physical pain, João felt a warmth in his chest. There was something in Raphael's posture that made him believe that this battle was not just his. It was a fight for something much bigger. The next morning, the two of them set off for the avenue where the incident had occurred. Raphael carried a backpack with basic equipment, a recorder, a notepad, and a camera. They walked around the place, observing every detail, while Raphael asked questions to the people who passed by. Many were reluctant to speak, afraid of reprisals, but some voices began to emerge. One of the first witnesses was Dona Helena, a middle-aged woman who worked at a nearby newsstand. "I saw everything," she said, shaking her head indignantly. "This man was just walking along quietly when that guy came in. The police officer arrived out of nowhere. It was unfair, shameful. He had no right to treat a man like that." Raphael thanked Dona Helena while meticulously writing down every detail of her testimony. João listened in silence, absorbing her words. Each account seemed to reinforce his decision to move on. As the day progressed, other witnesses appeared. A young delivery man who was riding his bike at the time of the incident offered a video recorded on his cell phone. The images clearly showed Torres pushing him and João falling. It was compelling evidence that Raphael knew could change everything. That night, as they reviewed the materials they had collected, Raphael noticed that his grandfather's story was gaining traction on social media. Posts with videos and photos of the incident were shared thousands of times. Supportive comments poured in from all over the country. Army veterans sent messages of solidarity, while ordinary citizens expressed outrage. Among the messages, one caught everyone's attention. An investigative journalist, known for exposing cases of abuse of authority, expressed interest in the story. "Grandpa, the journalist wants to talk to us," Raphael said, showing João his cell phone. He thinks this story can open the eyes of many people. João nodded, with a discreet gleam in his eyes. He wasn't looking for fame, but he knew that if his voice could help others, it would be worth it. The next day, they met the journalist at a discreet cafe in the city center. The reporter, a young and articulate man, shook João's hand respectfully. "Mr. João, before we begin, I want to say that you are an inspiration. I was shocked by what happened, and I think Brazil needs to hear your story." João, still cautious, replied, "I don't want revenge, my son. I just want justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who goes through this and has no way to fight back." The journalist listened carefully to every word, writing everything down. He promised to report the story honestly and carefully, knowing that it represented much more than an isolated incident. As the journalist left the cafe, Rafael turned to his grandfather with a smile of satisfaction. "Grandpa, we're on the right track. They won't ignore this." João looked at his grandson, and for the first time in days, felt true relief. The battle was just beginning, but he knew he wasn't alone. This part shows the preparation of the fight for justice, with moments of tension and hope. The involvement of social networks, witnesses, and the media increases the impact and creates an even greater expectation for the next steps. The court was packed that morning. The room, which should inspire order and respect, was filled with a mixture of anxiety and tension. Between the press, the protesters outside, and the citizens who managed to find a place to watch, João's case against Corporal Torres had become a symbol of resistance. João entered accompanied by Rafael, each step firm, despite the marks still visible on his face and arm. He knew that the fight was bigger than the humiliation he suffered. It was a battle for dignity. Rafael was at his side, with a serious expression, but transmitting confidence. "Grandpa, are you ready?" Rafael asked, holding his grandfather's shoulder. João took a deep breath, adjusted his posture, and replied, "I have faced much greater challenges, my grandson. Today, I am here not only for myself, but for all those who were silenced." The judge entered the room, and the trial began. Torres' lawyer was the first to speak, trying to paint the police officer's approach as a misunderstanding. "My client, Corporal Torres, was simply doing his duty as a public safety agent. He believed he was dealing with a potentially dangerous situation and reacted according to his training. What happened was, at most, an excess that was misinterpreted," said the lawyer in a technical and cold tone. The narrative, however, began to crumble as soon as the evidence was presented. Rafael, with his notebook, had built a solid case. Witness statements, videos captured on cell phones, and even the history of complaints against Torres were exposed. Every detail dismantled the misunderstanding version. When João was called to testify, the room fell silent. He stood up with the help of his cane and walked to the pulpit. With a firm gaze and a posture that exuded authority, he began to speak. "Respect. That is the word I have learned to honor throughout my life. For more than 40 years, I served in the Brazilian army, always believing that the duty of a soldier deserves to be treated as if they were less than human." The room was silent for a moment until Rafael's lawyer presented the final evidence. The videos that clearly showed Torres pushing João and the witnesses confirming the abusive approach. The defense's argument crumbled with each new piece of evidence. When Torres was called to testify, he tried to justify his actions, but his voice was shaking. I was just doing my job. I thought he was acting suspiciously. I didn't know who he was. I just wanted to ensure public safety." The words seemed empty in the face of the strength of the testimonies and the evidence presented. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the certainty that the truth was on Joan's side. After hours of arguments and analysis, the judge finally announced the verdict. The tension in the room was almost palpable. This court finds the defendant, Corporal Torres, guilty of the charges of abuse of power and assault on an unarmed citizen. As a result, the officer will be suspended from his duties, receive a legal penalty, and must make a public retraction. The initial silence was quickly broken by murmurs of relief and discreet applause in the courtroom. Outside, the crowd anxiously awaited the outcome. When João and Rafael left the courtroom, they were greeted with shouts of support and applause. João, still standing firm, stopped for a moment to speak to the journalists who had gathered around him. Justice was served today, but this fight is not just mine. It represents all those who, in some way, have been treated with disrespect. Let this be a reminder that dignity should be the rule, not the exception. As he walked beside Rafael, João felt a mix of relief and responsibility. He knew that this victory was just the beginning of something bigger. Outside the courtroom, the crowd waited anxiously. As soon as João and Rafael appeared, a buzz took over the place. Shouts of support, applause, and cameras turned to them. João, with his upright posture and steady gaze, was now more than just a man who sought justice. He was a symbol of resilience and dignity. As Rafael helped his grandfather down the courthouse steps, journalists approached with microphones in hand. "Mr. João, how do you feel after today's decision?" one of them asked, holding out the microphone. João stopped, leaning on his cane. He took a deep breath, looking at the people gathered around him. His voice was calm but full of conviction. Today was an important step, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been through something similar. Justice has been served, but this is just the beginning. We need to ensure that respect and dignity are non-negotiable values in our society. What happened to me cannot be forgotten, and I hope this story inspires others not to remain silent in the face of injustice. João's words were met with warm applause. Many of the people present seemed emotional, some even discreetly wiping away tears. As they walked back to the car, Rafael couldn't hide his pride. "Grandpa, did you see people's reactions? You're inspiring so many people," he said, smiling. João just nodded, with a slight smile on his face. He knew that this struggle had gone beyond the boundaries of his personal experience. In the following days, João's story continued to spread. Images of his scarred face and his cane went viral, accompanied by messages of support and reflection. He was invited to be interviewed on TV shows. Articles were written about his journey, and he began to be recognized on the streets. One of the most memorable moments happened during a lecture he was invited to give at a university. The room was packed with students, professors, and curious onlookers. As he went up on stage, João felt the responsibility he now carried. "Good evening, everyone," he began, in his calm voice. "I never imagined that I would be here, talking about something so simple, and at the same time, so profound: respect. Throughout my life, I have learned that respect is not something that is demanded, but something that is built. And each of us, regardless of age, color, or social status, deserves to be treated with dignity." The audience was completely attentive. João shared moments from his life in the army, stories that demonstrated his dedication to the country and how that incident had become one of his greatest battles. "What happened to me was not just an attack on me personally. It was a reflection of something bigger, something that many people face every day, and often they don't have a voice to fight for. I hope my story is a reminder that it is always worth fighting for what is right." When he finished, the audience stood up to give him a standing ovation. Some young, aspiring police officers approached him to thank him and say that they wanted to honor the profession by learning from the mistakes of others. João, who had previously led a quiet life, now felt that he had a new purpose. He began accepting invitations to events, interviews, and meetings with young people. He knew that his story was a powerful tool to inspire change and raise awareness. Raphael, always by his side, helped organize his schedule and document everything. For him, every moment with his grandfather was a life lesson. One day, as they were returning from an event, Raphael said, "Grandpa, you have become more than an example. You are an inspiration." João smiled, placing his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Raphael, I only did what had to be done. Sometimes life puts us in situations that require courage, even when we are tired. But if my story can help other people, then it was worth it." Now, wherever he went, João was treated with respect and admiration. His face, previously unknown, had become a symbol of the fight for dignity and justice. He knew that the battle did not end there, but he felt at peace knowing that he had inspired a new generation to fight for a more just world. This part shows the transformative impact of João's victory, both in his life and in society. He goes from victim to icon, and the involvement of the people around him reinforces the power of his fight and message. Months after the trial, João Matos had already become a national symbol. His story inspired debates on TV programs, human rights campaigns, and even awareness initiatives about abuse of power. Despite all the recognition, João remained the same humble man who had faced that difficult day with dignity. On a sunny afternoon, João was invited to participate in a meeting with young, aspiring police officers at a public security academy. He sat in front of an audience full of anxious faces, some carrying doubts, others carrying admiration. When he stepped onto the stage, holding his inseparable cane, silence filled the room. "Good afternoon, everyone." His voice was calm but firm. "I want to start by saying that authority is not something that should be used as a privilege. It is a responsibility. The day we forget this, we will lose what is most important: respect for others." João shared details of his journey, from his time in the army to the incident that brought him there. He spoke about the impact of his actions and the importance of fighting for justice, even when it seems impossible. Remember, a uniform does not give you the right to disrespect anyone. It is a symbol of service, of protection. You have the power in your hands to make a difference, for good or for bad. Choose good. Choose respect. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Many young people approached him, asking for advice, thanking him for his words. João knew that, at that moment, he was planting seeds of change. As he walked with Raphael back to the car, João reflected on everything that had happened. His grandson, now closer than ever, smiled at his side. "Grandpa, do you realize how many lives you've changed?" Raphael asked. João laughed, shaking his head. "Raphael, I only did what I thought was right. What I've experienced has taught me that we should never accept injustice, no matter how small or large." Raphael stared at him for a moment, absorbing each word. "That's why you're an example, and I'm proud to be part of this story." Later that night, João sat at the table in his home, writing on a notepad. It was a speech he planned to use at an upcoming event, but his words carried something more: a call to action. Respect is not a privilege, it is a right. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of who we are or where we come from. And if you ever witness injustice, choose not to remain silent. Choose to act. Because sometimes the difference the world needs begins with one person who decides to say, "Enough is enough." Now, I ask you who are watching, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have the courage to fight for your dignity? Leave your opinion in the comments and share this story so that more people reflect on respect and justice. And don't stop here. We have another moving story waiting for you. Click now to watch and continue to be inspired. God bless, and until next time. This part closes the story with a powerful reflection and an invitation to engage, reinforcing Joanne's message and connecting the audience to the larger fight for dignity and justice. The narrative inspires action, keeping viewers engaged and ready to continue following stories, transforming